the whole reason that we even make ketones and use ketones is so that we can develop these big brains through our infancy and childhood and as adults. When ketones are present, our brain sucks them up and our brain just loves ketones.
Michael Brandt, I'm so excited to welcome you to the Better Show. Welcome.
Dr. Stephanie Estima, glad to be here.
We were just getting into a great conversation. I was like, stop talking. We have to actually officially start recording this because there was such good stuff in the conversation. We're going to be talking all about ketones as the main reason why we might consider doing something like the ketogenic diet or supplementing with exogenous ketones. You are the co-founder, I should say, of HVMN, which is a product, makes one of the products, Ketone IQ, that I love. And HVMN, I used to always pronounce it like human, but it stands for Health Via Modern Nutrition. Is that right?
It's kind of got that double play to it. Yeah. HVMN stands for Health Via Modern Nutrition, but it's got, that little double meaning.
A little human in there. All right. So before we get into all things ketones, I am very curious. I was saying this to you in the pre-chat. Someone with your background, so triathlete, marathoner, and of course you have, went to Stanford, all the sort of prestigious schools. How did you find yourself in researching ketone bodies? And I said this to you in the pre-chat, often when I have athletes that I'm caring for that are that are competing in marathons or anything that's sort of long distance, more often, we're starting to see some fat adapted athletes now, but more often than not, it's more of a, where's the gel pack? Where's the quick hit of sugar so that they can so that they don't bonk essentially. So how did you tell us a little bit about your story in terms of your background, and then how you found yourself working for HVMN or with HVMN?
Yeah. Starting the whole darn thing. Yeah. Well, my journey started where I was a computer science major. So I did computer science and product design at Stanford, got really into biohacking, where I saw a lot of my friends were designing random tech products, or the kind of the generation before, they made Snapchat, Instagram, selling ads to people all day. And the light bulb went off in my head that the human body is the next platform for innovation, because we see it happening now today, where people are wearing rings and watches and CGMs and tracking their sleep score and sending a cheek swab away to get their genetic profile. And I always say the human body is the most advanced piece of technology you'll ever own. It's not your iPod, not your MacBook, not even an Elon Musk rocket ship. Like, the human body is the most advanced piece of technology you will ever own. And we are just starting to understand what's going on in it. So a decade ago, I would have been considered a biohacker. I think now it has jumped the chasm to mainstream, where a lot of people are tracking their HRV, getting their blood panels done, maybe more than their doctor is asking them to, because they're just like curious, how are my biomarkers tracking? So I've always been into biohacking for the last decade, early on it. And what started happening was, I got into marathoning. I run 6-minute miles for the marathon. I train a lot. I started experimenting with low carb diets, seeing how that affected my training, seeing how I felt, seeing how that affected my productivity. And one of the big light bulb moments for me was seeing like bulletproof coffee take off, keto diet take off, intermittent fasting. Like my co-founder and I did a 7-day fast. Like we were doing a regular fasting meetup all the time in San Francisco, where we were headquartered all the time. And all of these pursuits, bulletproof coffee, intermittent fasting, keto diet, everyone's trying to make ketones, but it's almost the byproduct of this other thing that you're trying to do, which is often weight loss or related. The light bulb moment that went off for my co-founder and I were, hey, no, like ketones themselves are the main feature. They are not the byproduct of losing weight. Ketones themselves have these really incredible properties. And when we started looking through the literature, it's no joke. Like, they're very efficient for cellular metabolism. They create less oxidative stress when you do metabolize them. And the real nail in the coffin for us was when we launched our V1, the world's first ketone ester, back in 2017, we quickly after secured a $6 million contract with the United States Department of Defense Special Operations Command, where like they're not doing keto diet for weight loss. Like they specifically wanted a ketone in a bottle so that they could add onto their protocol to get these really compelling performance benefits out of it. And the research has continued from there. And so here we are in 2022, where we're beyond just working with elite operators. I don't think everyone in America knows what a ketone is yet. We are on our path where the mission is ketones should be as widespread. The same way I can go to a store and you can buy collagen, omega-3, caffeine. There's these nutritional primitives that are just almost ubiquitous. Ketones should be that ubiquitous. It should be a tool available in everyone's toolkit as a nutritional primitive. We're all doing metabolism all the time.
I love that. So I think that let's just do a very quick primer. And I think there's no one better to do it than with the co-founder of HVMN. What is a ketone? So you said like not everybody knows what a ketone is. I think that my audience, for the most part, has an understanding. But let's even go a level deeper and talk about how the ketone is produced and what are the differences, let's say, between an endogenously produced one and an exogenously supplemented one.
Yeah, that's a great place to start. What the heck is a ketone? A ketone is a metabolic substrate. So it's a source of energy. When you think about everything going on in your body, if you're exercising or thinking or just being alive, you are using energy, you have metabolism going on, and you need calories. You need a source of energy that is powering your muscle cells, your neurons, all of that. Ketones are an example of that. So glucose is another metabolic substrate. Fatty acids themselves are a metabolic substrate. Lactate is a metabolic substrate. There's not infinity of these. There's a handful of compounds that contain calories that can go into your metabolism, turn into ATP, the fundamental energy currency of your cell, and can power all of the things that you are doing. And some of these substrates have different properties to them. Some are more like fast. Some create more toxic buildup as they're metabolized. Some are better for longer term. Some are better for shorter term. Right? So you have this kind of menu of metabolic substrates. Ketones are one of them. Ketones in particular have some really advantageous properties to them. For instance, ketones are really friendly with your brain. So your brain loves ketones. Your brain cannot metabolize fatty acids. Fats cannot cross the blood-brain barrier. Our blood-brain barrier is very highly protected. Our brain doesn't let that much in. So glucose can cross the blood-brain barrier. Ketones can cross the blood-brain barrier. The whole reason that we even make ketones and use ketones is so that we can develop these big brains through our infancy and childhood and as adults. And you can think about ketone as this like almost like fundamentally human fuel specifically for our brain. Our brain just loves ketones. When ketones are present, our brain sucks them up. And so do other tissues in your body. Your muscles can use ketones like across the board. It's a metabolic substrate. It can work in a lot of different areas. So that's what a ketone is. I think the second part of your question was, okay, what's the difference between endogenous versus exogenous? So endogenous is endo, it's like inside of your body, genesis, like your body is making them yourself. So when you are eating low carb or fasting or exercising to where you're burning off carbs, whenever your carbs go low, whenever your blood sugar goes low, your body will start making its own ketones from fat. So that's endogenous ketogenesis. Those ketones are great. You can take the same ketone and you can also have it in a drink or other types of formats. So you can and that's exogenous. It's made outside of your body where you can get like our product Ketone IQ is you take a drink and then your blood ketone levels will rise right away as though you had been doing keto diet or fasting, but maybe you have, maybe you haven't. You just drank a shot of Ketone IQ and you got an exogenous ketone.
And is there any, let's talk a little bit about the state of the individual when you're supplementing, let's say with an exogenous ketone. And I'll say just, in the, we'll say spirit of transparency, I used to like give myself a lobotomy when I would hear like from eye rolling so hard when people would talk to me about like exogenous ketones. I was like, it was like these MLM companies and I would say, HVMN excluded. There's, certain ones that I'm thinking of. I was like, I just don't want to be associated with this. And then I sort of made this broad, sweeping generalization that if this company is acting a certain way, then all of them need to be this way. But I was wrong on that original presumption. I've since changed my mind on it, and I think that particularly when it comes to what you said around brain health. And also with metabolic disorders. One of the things I would notice in clinic, so I would have a lot of, for whatever reason, a lot of concussions, a lot of TBIs in my practice, and noticed if we could get the patient supplementing with some type of ketone, be it a salt or an ester, which we're gonna dissect a little bit today, the prognosis for that patient seemed to be much better than someone who didn't supplement. And it seems like, there's maybe a couple of different reasons for that, but I think that there is when you have and I would love for you to comment on this, it seems like when there's an injury to the brain, I think really injury anywhere, but specifically with the brain, we have this altered, altered production, of the Krebs cycle. And it seems to kind of like, there seems to be this fork in the road at the, pyruvate dehydrogenase level. Now we won't kind of get that far into the weeds, but it seems that when you can supplement with ketones, you can sort of skip over this like stall that happens at that state so that the brain can still continue to produce ATP and continually stay, we'll say metabolically efficient. So is there any, I know that there's literature that I've read, but is there any literature in particular that you have come across that supports the idea that ketone supplementation, particularly with TBI and or concussion, can help with wound healing, lowering inflammation, and then even, I'll throw one more thing in here, even with the, what seems to be like insulin sensitization or glucose uptake of the brain. Is there a direct? I know you're like, let me pull up all the studies. I can see you on the other side there. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I'm just jotting a few notes here, and yeah, this is great. Ketones in the brain, and to go back to just first principles on it of how our brain works, why the human brain is special and unique. An interesting fact not a lot of people know is that baby fat is unique to humans, and it does not exist even in other primates. Like when the neonate of other related species is born, there's no fat. And the reason that fat exists is because through our infancy and childhood, we are developing the largest brain of any species on the planet. And that fat, again, does not cross the blood-brain barrier. It gets turned into ketones. So starting before we're even born, our brain is this ketone machine. And
gobbler.
It's a ketone gobbler. I'm just thinking, I have like a 6-month-old daughter, and yes, she's a gobbler. And our brains are inextricably connected with ketones, and even through adulthood, because the idea is that, okay, on the savanna, you don't have constant access to sugar, carbs, and you can't store that much. In your brain, there's very little space in your brain, and just in your body in general, you can store a couple thousand calories as carbohydrates, whereas you can store 100 times as much, even if you're a lean individual. You can store 200K calories of fat that can turn into ketones. So there's no functioning as a human on the savanna without the ability to make and utilize ketones. So starting from that basis, yes, then we can draw out, okay, for TBI and concussions, what happens? Okay, so when you have a concussion, there's damage done at the moment of impact, and there is swelling and scarring that occurs, which interferes with future ability for blood flow to come into the neurons. And so you end up, when you scan people after a TBI or concussion, there's hypometabolism. So not enough metabolism is going on inside of the neurons. And it is interesting because ketones, as you mentioned, there's this fork in the road. Ketones go through this other pathway that's separate from glucose. It's related on some parts of the pathway, but it's different enough that it is able to get through and rescue brain activity, because in these instances where glucose cannot, It's a different type of molecule. It requires different cofactors to metabolize. Glucose cannot get through. Ketones can rescue brain energy. And so that's actually a really interesting area of application that we look at with the DoD, because there's, I don't know, you're jumping out of airplanes and stuff's exploding. Like there's, I think that people probably get it, that there's TBIs and concussions happening. It's also really interesting, for instance, we work closely with some groups within the NFL, because if you're banging your head around all day, there's a strong argument to be made that almost by default, you should just drink ketones after a game, like whether you had a concussion or, you had some subconcussive knocks to the head,
even if it's subclinical, right? Even if you're not displaying any sympathetic escape or dilation of the pupils or anything like that, maybe it is I love that. Maybe there is a really great application for some post-game ketone supplementation in the event that there's some hypoglucose, some, we'll say, inferior fuel partitioning of glucose.
Yeah. Yeah, might as well, for abundance of caution, prophylactic. And then another area you touched on as well was just general hypometabolism. Generally, when there's not enough metabolism going on in the brain, which happens, for instance, in Alzheimer's, where Alzheimer's interferes with the brain's ability to do metabolism. So there's this really interesting. Well, first of all, Alzheimer's is becoming widely understood as not just this neurological disease, but a metabolic disease. There's massive correlation with Alzheimer's and type 2 diabetes. And we are getting to it almost near consensus, or there's a very vocal understanding that Alzheimer's itself is a metabolic disease. At least some instances of the disease. It's a complicated disease where basically you have insulin resistance. And just to back it up for a second for people, that when you eat sugar, your blood sugar goes up, and then your pancreas releases insulin to address that blood sugar. If you do that too much over your life, the insulin stops working. Your body stops listening to that insulin. You get insulin resistance. And then no matter how much sugar you eat, you don't feel any energy. You don't feel energetic because the insulin that you're trying to release, it is not working. And when you have this insulin resistance in the brain, that's Alzheimer's. And so there's a really interesting study on this researcher, Stephen Cunnane. Maybe people have heard of him. He's one of the, I would say, just goats of the space, where he did a study with MCTs. So MCT is a form of fat, medium chain triglyceride, that relatively efficiently turns into ketones. So it's not even a direct ketone drink per se. It's just a form of fat that can convert into ketones pretty easily. And even with that, he showed these amazing results where basically he had Alzheimer's patients. So they have hypometabolism, not enough metabolism going on in the brain, and reduced cognitive function. And then you're kind of on this spiral, because if the neurons aren't functioning correctly, then they get worse. It spirals where they build up more. There's more neuropathology that develops, and then less glucose can get in, and then it gets worse and worse. That with this MCT diet that was inducing patients to create their own ketones, that they were able to reverse this. And they were able to reverse, there's 5 different markers for cognitive functioning, including one of the major ones for tracking Alzheimer's specifically. They were able to reverse these. So people were not just slowing down their Alzheimer's, they were basically throwing a life raft via ketones to their neurons, and those neurons were able to swim again. So it's pretty interesting stuff. And this is where it's okay, well, the keto diet is cool. Get beach bod ready if you want to do the keto diet. But there's clearly something going on with ketones per se, where irrespective of keto diet, yes or no, that the ketones themselves have this certain property that's, it's not just this thing for weight loss people.
What I think is so interesting about what you're talking about is that we know that generally as we age, just as a consequence of aging, we tend to become more insulin resistant in general. So if you're already consuming a higher, you sort of have these big spikes, these postprandial big glucose spikes, let's say, which will follow, big insulin spikes. Over time, as you were saying, we habituate to that. So the same level of insulin is not going to do the same amount of job. This is what we see the fate of type 2 diabetics, right? Over time, we invariably, if they're using insulin as a therapy, they over time always have to up their insulin levels because the body habituates to that hormone. But it does seem like ketone metabolism doesn't attenuate over it. It doesn't seem to decrease in the same way, let's say, that glucose metabolism does as we age. Is there any literature or any thoughts that you have on ketone metabolism as we age? Is there any, do we see changes along the spectrum or along the arc of life, let's say?
No. And the reason is that it's non-insulin mediated. So you do not need insulin in order to metabolize ketones. And so as a result, ketone metabolism scales with substrate availability. So like if you have twice as much ketones, you're metabolizing twice as much ketones then. There's
to get better as you use more of it? Is that what you're saying?
That's true too. I was just saying that if you just today take one dose of ketone IQ and versus you take 2 doses, if you have 2, then there's twice as much available in your bloodstream and you'll be doing twice as much metabolism. It's not gated. There was a study done where they basically showed that, okay, we can measure how much metabolism is going on. And as they ratcheted up the amount of ketone availability, the amount of metabolism scaled directly proportional. Basically, it's not blocked. Like there's not an insulin blocker the way that there is with glucose, where if you increase glucose levels 2x, maybe metabolism 2x is, but if your insulin isn't working, maybe it doesn't 2x. Like that, with ketones, there isn't that dynamic where ketone metabolism just scales with the amount that you have available. And to answer your question, actually, on the, okay, well, do you get better at it? That's yes, you also get better at it. That when I think people are familiar with like becoming more keto adapted or metabolically flexible, where, if you've been eating high carb diet your whole life, the first time that you try not eating carbs, it's hard on 2 counts. One is that your body has a harder time making ketones. There's enzymes involved that you have not ramped up yet. So you're going to have a harder time making ketones, and then you're going to have a harder time metabolizing ketones because, again, your body hasn't been doing it and you don't have the enzymes built up. It's all in your genetic codes. I don't want to, that's the silver lining there, where like anyone can become metabolically flexible by changing up their lifestyle and eating lower carb, being more active, and increasing the amount that their body is able to make and use ketones. One thing that's interesting about drinking a ketone, an exogenous ketone, is that it actually helps on that second component, which is the enzymes involved with metabolizing the ketone. So drinking a ketone is not going to help your body to make more ketones. It's kind of separate. If anything, it will actually temporarily slow it down because you have ketones present, your body doesn't need to make it. But what it does help you do is accelerate the rate at which you are metabolizing. You will increase the amount of ketone metabolizing enzymes that are circulating. So it helps you to become more keto adapted. So that's where when people are trying to go low carb or keto, where exogenous ketones can help play a role, like ketone IQ can play a role. But I'm very careful to say this is not like a cure-all. And I think what you were saying earlier is there's been a lot of like, wham, like ketone weight loss, shred the pounds off. Like it's just like way more nuanced than that. Like a ketone, you're fundamentally eating calories. Like there's calories inside of those ketones. If you use them correctly, yes, you can induce your body to be more metabolically flexible. If you use them in conjunction with a lower carb diet, if you're more active, then they can, certainly you can benefit from it. But it's not this like zap the pounds off magic supplement that I think in a lot of ways set the space back in an unproductive way.
Yeah, I really appreciate your comments there, because it often seems like even people who are just looking for answers, and I don't fault anybody, because there is a lot of conflicting information when you're trying to look at how am I going to improve my health. We have plant doctors, we have carnivore doctors, we have keto doctors, we have like all these different so it can be really confusing for the consumer. But what I often like to get back to is like, what are the fundamental basics? And I think when we talk about substrate, right, ketones are a fundamental substrate from an evolutionary lens that have been with us for, hundreds of thousands of years, that have, propagated the survival of the species. So we want to be considerate of that. But it's not just what's the one supplement that I'm going to take to lose weight, Although I will say that it does have a bit of an appetite, suppressing effect whenever I take Ketone IQ. I typically, I work out in the morning. That's the time where I can get my workout in. So I usually do it fasted. And this morning, for example, woke up and just like for whatever reason, didn't have the best sleep last night. Like I couldn't get my mind to shut off. I was thinking about things, woke up, maybe once or twice overnight. And then when I woke up this morning, I was like, oh God, I have legs today. So went downstairs, I have a little home gym, and then took my Ketone IQ with some, I have like a little electrolytes in the morning, and was able to not only just get through my workout, but have a great workout. But I know that the days that I take Ketone IQ, so leg day, it's leg day for me today. I know I'm hungry. Like I'm always hungrier the days that I do leg day, but I'm not as ravenous, let's say today, because I took that Ketone IQ in the morning, than I would be otherwise. So it does seem that there is some appetite suppressing, effect of taking ketone bodies. Is that correct?
Yeah, there was this really interesting study done where the researcher had two participant groups, one that was taking placebo and one that was taking ketones. The placebo was, they gave the same amount of calories to both. So it was 100 grams of sugar.
Isocaloric, yeah.
Isocaloric, 100 grams of sugar versus 100 grams of ketone. Sorry, it's 100 calories worth. 100 calories of sugar versus 100 calories of ketones. And they showed that the ketones were that ketone group was significantly appetite suppressed compared to the sugar group. So on subjective measures of like, hey, how hungry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? The sugar group felt hungrier sooner. And then when they looked at ghrelin, the hunger hormone, they did blood draws. They showed just objectively on that blood draw that people with elevated ketones from exogenous ketones had ghrelin was suppressed. So super interesting there, which I don't think is that crazy for people to wrap their minds around, where like just different calories are different. Like different calories are more satiating. You have on the one end, like a lot of what's in the, 7-Eleven or the aisles of the grocery store. I think a lot of people know, try to shop the perimeter of the grocery store, not the aisles. A lot of the highly engineered carbohydrates, potato chips, candy, like stuff's really addicting, AKA it is not satiating. It does not scratch the itch. In fact, like you eat it and like you get itchier. Like you eat, like try just having 3 potato chips. You know what I mean? It's like you're either having 0 or you're having like half a bag.
The whole bag. Yeah. Or half a bag for you, the whole bag for me. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just being, when you are looking at the different types of food options available, certain foods are inherently addicting. Certain foods are much more satiating. Like an avocado or a hard-boiled egg is going to, just intuitively is going to satiate you better than like the same amount of calories from cotton candy or cookies or something. That like sugar is going to get you addicted. And so the ketones are on that end of the spectrum where it's just like really satiating. So this is where, like, I'm not like a hard liner on keto diet. I also personally run a lot. So my mission is to keep my net carb balance low. But I'm also running 8 miles in the morning. So like I'll eat some carbs, run it off, keep my net carb balance low, net of the activity I'm doing. But for the reason I like the keto diet and just like relatively low carb in general is that the higher fat stuff is just more satiating. And so it's a lot easier when you say, hey, just like eat as much avocado and eggs and salmon and steak, like eat as much of that as you want. People have a lot easier time with that because they can literally eat as much as they want as long as they don't have sugary stuff, carby stuff. And I think if the mission is, hey, I want to stick to, 1,800 calories a day. Well, if you just have a rule that, hey, I can eat whatever I want, but it's only to this like really satiating stuff where every calorie there really counts. Like the 500 calorie lunch I had actually kept me full to noon. Hey, I had a Ketone IQ energy shot, and yeah, there's some calories in there, but like I just wasn't hungry for hours afterwards. That like the quality of calories matters a lot. You'll drive yourself nuts if you're trying to stick to 1,800 calories and you're having like like you're going to be fiending. Like they're going to be addicting. It's going to be hard to, you're going to hit the ceiling by lunchtime.
100%. 100%. And I also just think that, just as a woman, as a cycling woman, I think that's a bad idea anyway. We shouldn't be trying to, and this is just more for my women who are listening, that we shouldn't have this, inflexibility of thought where it's like you have this mark, 1,800 calories, 1,600, whatever the number is, and you stick to it no matter what. Because of course we have, like I did last night, like changes in sleep, you have changes in stress, and then of course changes in the hormonal flux over the course of the menstrual cycle as well. You mentioned that you were... Yeah, you mentioned that you were a runner, that you run 8 miles. There is some, the other thing that I think is really interesting with ketones as well is that there does seem to be, a signaling molecule to help the uptake, let's say, of nutrients post-workout. So are you someone who, like I tend to preload my ketone IQ or ketone ester, which I want to talk a little bit about the difference of those two as well. But is there any benefit in post-workout nutrition? Can we consider supplementing, let's say, with a ketone body or ketone bodies, I should say, post-workout, post-lift, post-run?
Yeah, it does seem that ketones help with recovery. There was this study on Belgian cyclists where they had participants biking, working out twice a day for 3 weeks. So this is actually it was in trained cyclists, and it was meant to emulate Tour de France style race conditions. So biking hard every day, multiple times a day, in some cases for 3 weeks. The two groups were identical, able to eat whatever they want, same training protocol. The one difference being that in group A, they were drinking ketones 3 times a day. So they had ongoing elevated ketone levels from exogenous ketones throughout that 3 weeks. And by the end of that 3 weeks, the ketone group had a 15% higher training load in that last week. And then in the time trial at the end,
15%. Wow.
Like they were just able to do more. So it's like, hey, we're training, like they're just covering more miles in their block of time. And this is placebo controlled. So it's not like, people didn't know what they were having or not. And then like even the non-ketone group was having 3 times a day, something weird tasting that was not a ketone, it was inert placebo. And at the end of those 3 weeks, they did a time trial, and the ketone group was doing significantly better on that final trial, also 15% better on that the final half hour of the time trial. At the end of the 3 weeks, they were doing significantly better. And the mechanism of action, that we're still all figuring out. Like we are doing research on it. There's other groups just generally at universities and whatnot, is that there's 2 main components. One is that it seems to help with muscle protein resynthesis. So when you work out hard, you get a bunch of micro tears in your muscles. The rebuilding of those tears is what makes you stronger. So like the point of working out is to get these micro tears. It's a good thing, not a bad thing. But the repair takes time, and ketones seem to accelerate muscle protein resynthesis. You have to have protein though too. I want to make that really clear. It's not like ketones are not just magically solving it. Like it's when you have ketones and protein, ketones seem to accelerate the rate of that protein resynthesizing your own muscle proteins. And then the second component is muscle glycogen reuptake, where like all of your muscles basically have this little storage capacity for glycogen. And if you just worked out, you probably depleted your glycogen. It's healthy, good to do. Like you want to deplete your glycogen stores on a regular basis. But if you're a Tour de France cyclist or pro athlete, the first thing you want to do after working out is refill those batteries. It takes time. And again, ketones, when taken with your post-workout protein and carbs, they seem to accelerate the rate of muscle glycogen reuptake. So you're getting faster protein rebuild, you're getting faster glycogen reuptake, and then just in the kind of ecological sense, like when you're actually observing the cyclists, it's just the training numbers speak for themselves, and whatever the mechanism of action is, people are doing better when they have habitual elevated ketones.
That's so fascinating. And I wonder if there's anything to do, because one of the things that we know with traditional bodybuilding, at least, is post-workout, you have some protein and you have some carbs. So the protein is driving the MPS that you were talking about, the muscle protein synthesis. The carbs are helping to prevent muscle protein breakdown. So that catabolic effect on the muscle. And I wonder, and this is just me like spitting out ideas. This could be totally off base, but I wonder if the ketones in some way are replacing through, let's say, insulin sensitivity, because we know that ketones help with glucose uptake. I wonder if they're helping prevent also the muscle protein breakdown. Do we know if am I on track, or am I just talking crazy?
Yeah. Yes. So that is a super interesting insight, and it's something that people have been looking at as like, does the reason that your muscle is better at resynthesizing, is it because like there's just less breakdown taking place, less and the understanding of it is that, okay, so when you are at an energy deficit, your body will go wherever to get energy. So like if you just worked out hard, it's kind of counterproductive, but like your body will just start, if you're at an energy deficit, you'll start ripping up your own hard-earned muscles.
Hard-earned muscle, that's correct.
So if you're just starving, your body will try to break down your muscles and turn it into glucose. So that's the last thing you want to have happen after you're working out. So super important to have, any type of post-workout nutrition, so you're not just like burning your muscle to your brain alive or like something like that. And then the anti-catabolic process of ketones is super interesting there, where you're basically like, preventing your body from ripping it up. One way to think about ketones that's maybe an interesting mental model is that like normally your body has ketones present when you're in like kind of endurance mode, like you've eaten low carb and or you're exercising a lot. Like think about you on the savannah. It's like you're generally low carb. You're not eating a lot of carbs and you're moving around a lot. So when you drink ketones, you get your body into that endurance mode. It kind of feels like runner's high, first of all, but you also make your body like efficient. Like your body is going to stop ripping up its protein. It's going to say, okay, there's ketones present. We got to survive here. Let's stop like ripping the shingles off the roof. Let's use these ketones that are present. Let's preserve muscle mass and let's survive it through. So you basically get into this like super efficient endurance mode that's like protecting your protein when you have ketones present.
So we've talked about how ketones can augment, let's say, muscle performance, muscle recovery, TBIs, concussion, brain health. If there's someone listening that's like, man, I just hate the keto diet, like I just love me some carbs, is there a place for ketone supplementation if the person is primarily glycolytic? So we've been talking about how the ketone diet, like the main point of it really is the production of these endogenous ketones. But let's say someone's like, you know what, it's just not for me. Can we still supplement with ketone bodies, let's say, if someone's having like a higher carbohydrate consumption, or, irrespective of consumption, they're not like the primary substrate, let's say, is glucose?
Yeah. Look, we're all doing metabolism all of the time. We all have the fundamental tools to metabolize ketones. So if you're bought in on the idea that ketones are a really helpful substrate, it doesn't matter whether you're doing a keto diet or not. Like the fact is that we all have some amount of ketones swimming around in our body. And especially when we exercise, you start burning glycogen. Yeah, you turn your battery packs in your muscles. It starts flowing and actually being used for muscle activity. But you also start ramping up your own endogenous ketone production, whether you're doing keto diet or not. I think one of the things to demystify is that like ketones, keto diet, it's not this black and white thing where you're either like bulletproof coffee, fat, butter, bacon, 24/7, or you're like the other end of the spectrum. Like there's a lot of shades in between where, yeah, if you're just exercising, if you're getting after it for an hour, 2 hours, your body's definitely making ketones. So like, we all have the fundamental tools that we need to make ketones and to metabolize ketones. And so can you have ketones if you're not keto diet? Like, yes, absolutely. I would say you don't have like a donut and then ketones on top of it. Like you just had a donut and some ketones.
You
like
have substrate. You have the substrate.
Yeah,
like you
already, like you just ate a lot. But if what you're looking for is like some of the things that we mentioned, like you're trying to accelerate your recovery, or you're carb friendly, but like, hey, for your afternoon pick me up, you don't want to have a Snickers bar or a soda with all this sugar in it. Like you can be carb friendly. Like I would say I'm carb friendly. Like I will have carbs before I run, but it's like it's like oatmeal or like fibrous carbs that are like slow uptake that are not spiking my insulin. And so I'm carb friendly. And then, yeah, if I want a afternoon pick me up, I'm not going to have a Coca-Cola. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to have a Kit Kat bar. And so having a shot of Ketone IQ, like I just think about it as a zero carb, zero caffeine energy boost. And yeah, if you also have carbs in your diets, it's kind of beside the point.
I love what you're saying because I think that, I've softened on this as well. So when I first started doing the keto diet, I was like, all carbs are evil all the time. We should never have any carbs. You know, I was very extreme. We'll call it like 5 to 7 years ago. But I've softened on it because there is value to carb. I tend to be of the camp that you need to earn your carbs, that you don't just get to have a bagel and cereal and whatever. I think that you need to be prioritizing protein. And I think that fat is such an important, and, you know, we'll bring it a little further and say ketone bodies are such an important, substrate for the body that you just can't ignore them. But should we be fearful of carbs? Absolutely not. I mean, I've had guests on that have talked about things like blueberries and like all fruits that have fructose, right? And then that are all, you know, like very important modulators of the methylome, very important modulators in terms of longevity and signaling of the sirtuins and all the things. So I think that it is very, very important for us to be embracing carbohydrates, but thinking about, like you've been saying, like on the savannah, like think about it on the savannah. It wouldn't be, you know, a pint maybe of strawberries. It would be like a handful, whatever you could kind of pick off of, you know, if you raspberry, whatever you could pick off the bush or whatever. So I think, I mean, we can kind of get into a separate conversation around portion size and Uber Eats and sort of this like immediate gratification of things, but carbs are important. And I'm probably going to get some blowback for saying this, but I do think that you should earn your carbohydrates. Like if you go for an 8-mile run, like hot damn, like give yourself some oatmeal, you know, like you need it, like you've earned it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a great framework for it. And, you know, there's different types of carbs, right? Like there's no evolutionary reason why you would need a Reese's peanut butter cup. There's no peanut butter cups in the savannah, right? So like that's a kind of carb where it's like high fructose corn syrup. It's just spiking your blood glucose. Like there's no amount of exercising that it's where like that's what you need. Look, if you got to live life. If you want to have that now and then, okay. But it's like, I don't know. You can also smoke a Marlboro Red now and then too, I guess. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't want to be a total hard ass about it, but it's like I think people are realizing that the really spiky, sugary carbs, especially with a lot of fructose, not good for you. Have it now and then if you like to enjoy life, sure. But there's like not a place for it in a well-rounded diet. It's like strictly for fun. And I think we've been tricked by just 100 years of some of the smartest marketers in the world, like trying to trick us that like Fruit Loops is an acceptable breakfast, and it's not. And I think we need to.
Oh, even if you just go back to the history of like, I'm sure you are aware of Kellogg and like why the cereal industry even exists. It was because they didn't want, I think it was like, I mean, Kellogg himself just, anyway, like it was like to prevent people from masturbating and preventing people from, you know, orgasming because it was somehow viewed as in his, I can't remember what religion it was, but just the worst thing ever.
It was bad, and that the cereal was going to slow people down. Like that's why they designed it. Hey, this will reduce people's libido. It'll slow them down. So let's
right. It does.
Right. So
it does do that. Yeah.
And then I like what you're saying as far as the equation, where it's like, I think the issue with the equation is that if you're having like Reese's peanut butter cups, like you're already dead. Like that one side of the equation, like you got to run a couple miles for that, like to earn it. Versus if you have a more sane approach where it's like, hey, we're having some blueberries, we're having maybe some oatmeal, maybe like some this here and there, like a small amount of rice with your dinner, maybe. If you're, I mean, rice is kind of bad for you, so it's I don't want to overly advocate for the rice, but if you have some amount of like sane carbs and then you're very active, then you are able to actually balance your equation. And I think I like the idea of earn your carbs, like make it so that your net amount of carbs, like if you're eating some carbs, make sure you're burning them off. Because what you don't want to do is be eating a bunch and then it's just sitting around. in your bloodstream, giving you insulin resistance, turning into fat. Like that's like giving you low energy. Like you want to make sure that you are, one way to think about it is like you want to make sure you're like drawing down your carb battery. Like if you're, I think this is true for like some electronic devices where you want to like run it down to zero sometimes and then you refill it all the way. Like you want to be doing that with carbs. You don't want to be like constantly upping the tank. You want to like run out of carbs and then have some more if you and then run it down. But it's important to like run it down, get all the ketone metabolism stuff that we've been talking about going, like clear it out, whether that's through a fast, whether that's through eating low carb in general, whether it's through exercise. Like you're not supposed to have this like constantly high carb battery all the time.
Let's pivot a little bit and let's talk a little bit about ketone salts and esters, because Ketone IQ, the product that we've been talking about that I take fasted, is an ester. That has come such a long way. So the reason why we're having this conversation, Chris Irving messaged me. He's like, you got to try this product. Have you ever had ketone esters before? I'm like, yes. And I hate them. I'm not interested. Like, I don't like the taste of them. It tastes like acid. And he's like, no, I promise they're amazing. And so he sent me a bottle and I was like, oh, actually, this is really great, because when I first tried them, I don't know when it was, maybe 16, 17, something like that. It felt like I was drinking like battery acid. Like I couldn't get it down.
That's
it was
probably our stuff.
Awful. It was awful. So let's talk a little bit about the evolution. Actually, before we do that, let's talk about what a ketone salt is and what an ester is. So let's talk about beta hydroxybutyrate, and they're bonded with an electrolyte. Like explain to us what it is.
Yeah. Let's go. Okay, so when you're looking at your blood ketone levels, the main thing that you're looking at is blood BHB, beta hydroxybutyrate. So if you get a blood ketone meter off of Amazon, you're measuring your ketone levels, you're measuring your blood BHB, and that's how you measure, am I in ketosis or not, or how high am my ketone levels? Am I at 0.5, 1.2? Like we're talking about BHB there. Okay, so with ketone salts, what you have is a BHB molecule that is bounded to a salt molecule. So it can be sodium, magnesium, potassium. So you have these like different types of salts in the chemistry sense that are bounded to a BHB. What's interesting about that process is it's very cheap to manufacture. So this is like, these have been on the market for a little while. They're very cheap, and the main drawback on them is that they don't elevate your ketones that much, because for every ketone you're having a molecule of salt. It's like with coffee, it's like if every molecule of caffeine was bounded to a molecule of salt. It's like, well, I'm drinking a lot of salt over here. Like it's hard to drink that much salt without getting GI issues. Like you just have an upset stomach, and that salt bond itself just like slows down the uptake. So it's I think of salts as kind of the cheap and dirty way to get an exogenous ketone. Like there is a ketone in there, it kind of works, but it's not really. It doesn't elevate your ketones that much. It's hard to get above like 1.0 millimole with a salt. I don't know if it's possible. With the breakthrough, so like the US DOD is not like working with salts, because like they're not interesting levels of ketone elevation. What the breakthrough was for us, so in 2017 we launched the world's first ketone ester, where we made an ester of two different things. So there's BHB and there's something very similar called BDO, which converts right away into BHB. So like two nearly identical things that you can like esterify together, basically glue together. We launched that in 2017 and got our big contract with the DoD. We're running it. It tasted terrible. We learned a lot along the way around just the performance profile, the taste, and we learned a lot. And it was also very expensive to make it that way. And then the light bulb went off where we realized that actually, like as I was saying, that this ester that we had in our V1, it was a BHB plus a BDO. We started looking specifically at just the BDO component, and we actually just isolated that, and that has become the anchor now for our V2. You might ask, okay, why don't you just drink just the BHB? The BHB is extremely acidic, so you can't just drink straight BHB. It's too acidic. You won't be able to have much of it at all. But BDO itself is really interesting. We actually like it better than our V1 ester because it has a better PK curve to it. So it's like less of a intense spike in ketones. You get the same amount of ketones, but it's a gentler curve. Like you basically spend more time with elevated ketones, much more palatable, and we brought down the price significantly. So we're now able to like have it in grocery stores and stuff for under $5 a shot versus our first version was the crazy stuff that you tasted probably cost you $33 for the experience of tasting something insane. So we've basically been working with the DoD and with our other elite operators, as well as just at this point, I think people got the message that like we are broadening this out. This is not just this elite Navy SEAL juice. Like as we've been getting this into the market, we've just been listening to people and what do they want and what is a performance profile people are really after, taste, cost, ideal PK curve, pharmacokinetic curve, like what do people want for different performance cases. And so it was really exciting. In January of this year, we launched V2, which checks a lot of the boxes that we had learned along the way. And it's been doing great. We've been, it's opened up a new window where I would say for the past several years, we've been in science fair project mode, like working with research scientists, working with biohackers, super elite performers, to now it's like, hey, we're in like grocery stores, we're selling on Amazon, we're just out there. And we are, the idea was never for ketones to just be like stuck in a lab for super high performers, but we wanted to get it out there the way that, collagen, you can go to the store and you can just buy collagen, or you can buy CBD, like these other nutritional primitives. It's like ketones are cool. We're all doing metabolism all of the time. We should all have access to this tool in our toolkit for the various things that we're trying to do. Whether we're
so irrespective if you're a Navy SEAL, like you can be a Navy SEAL, but you can also be, we're talking about this in pre-chat, you can also be a house mom who's just trying to like have enough energy to take care of her kids and get, the things done that she needs to get done in her everyday life. And both of those two, let's say, cohorts can benefit from ketone supplementation.
Exactly. It's like protein, right? Like, do you need to be Arnold Schwarzenegger to have protein? Like, it's like, no, like a normal person should just eat more protein because we're all made out of muscle, right? So like there's certain, the analogies, I like the way you said it. It's like the different cohorts, they're still doing the same fundamental things. They have different endpoints in mind, but like, I don't know, my mom takes protein and because she's older and she wants to make sure she has good muscle strength through old age. So, okay, like she's not Arnold Schwarzenegger, but she still has muscles, so she's going to have protein. And it sounds like you advocate a lot and with your community here that people know, like, okay, I should have more protein in my diet. Again, whether we were talking about this in the pre-chat, like you might not even necessarily be trying to get jacked. It's harder to get super jacked than you think. Like going to the gym and lifting heavy a few times a week and eating enough protein in your diet, not going to get you looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Like we should probably not. Like you should be so lucky if you are. Like you maybe got the genetic lottery. But in general, we should all be eating more protein. All be using our muscles. We should be thinking the same way about metabolic health. Like, okay, how do I use my metabolism better? How do I fuel it with better things rather than worse things?
So you were saying that ketone salts will probably get you to about 1 millimolar. Is there an estimate, and with like a very acute, let's say, area under the curve, or very acute rise in ketones, and then I would say probably also just as quickly a fall in that. Is there an estimate when we're taking an ester?
Yeah. So
you don't even know if we can get to 1 millimole with salt.
With salt, I think like you're good if I see salts going above like 0.5, but I don't think it's easy to hit 1.0 without getting stomach upset on the way. So for ours, like we get you to like, it depends how much you take. That's one of the interesting things to do.
So let's say it's one shot, like the 10 mils, which is one serving size.
Yeah. 10 will get you to 1, and then you can have multiple shots. So it depends what you're going is for. If you're just trying to like jam at your desk, like work on stuff, like 1 10-gram shot is nice. If you're Navy SEAL, Ironman, we say like, okay, well, let's look at different dose protocols like zero point 0.5 grams per kilogram of body weight to where someone's having like 2-3 shots. Um, and the idea then is that, okay, well, if you explicitly want to get above 2.0 millimole and hang on there, then having a couple of shots or re-upping along the way starts making sense. So there's got a lot of like flexibility to it where like one shot is nice for just kind of casual energy boost, appetite suppression. But if you're trying to go like max out your 15-mile run, then it starts making sense to have more. Just like with all your other energy sources too. Like the way to use it around a run or workout is basically like whenever you're taking a snack, a goo shot or whatever, whenever you're like taking the other fuel that you are taking in for your bike ride or your run, like have about a third of it as ketones. So if you're having if you're having a snack bar, like, or you have like a water that has some sort of energy inside of it, maybe it's a carb mix inside of it, like have 1/3 of the calories being from ketones as well. And then you have this like blended approach. That's what our like Tour de France rider protocol would be.
So if you're an athlete, we're looking at 0.5, did you say grams per kg?
Yeah.
Yeah. So and then if you're
that's like the Navy SEAL protocol. That's like
So that's like that would be super physiologic for someone like myself, who, like you're saying, is looking for a little bit of an energy boost. Didn't sleep really well last night, but I have something in the gym that I have to get done. Like, I took I think it was about maybe it was like one and a half shots this morning.
Yeah.
Yeah. That would be. Do we see? When we're looking at, let's say, the area under the curve for someone taking an ester versus a salt, is there an ideal target that you would be, let's say, when you're using exogenous ketones to hit, and does that change for women? Or are we just looking at this purely from a mass perspective and performance?
It depends what the performance outcome goal is. Like if you are trying to recover, if you're Tour de France rider, okay, like then I would say take more so that you are able to get to 2.0 millimole. So you're able to really accelerate the muscle protein resynthesis, muscle glycogen reuptake. That protocol starts making more sense. Again, if you're just the average casual person, you can almost go off of feel. It's like, okay, I feel good off of one shot or 1.5 shots or half a shot. Like I know how that makes me feel. For a lot of the data here is like just gender agnostic. What I would say for women, it sounds like you are more dialed in than me on like specific nutritional differences with men and women. One thing is I know that like cortisol spikes during fasting is a major concern, or like something that comes up a lot, as well as how that maybe overlays with menstrual cycle. And one thing that we have seen is that ketones reduce stress response. That's part of what goes on with those highly trained cyclists, is that like they have less of a stress response when they have ketones. So I think there's something interesting there where if we're concerned about like fasting spiking cortisol levels, that ketones could be interesting there. But I don't want to overspeak what I know. It sounds like you actually know a lot about kind of the cycles that you want to optimize for women, how that might deviate from what's like recommended for males, or unfortunately is recommended, is like, it seems like a lot of the standard recommendations is like male dominant. Doesn't sound fair to me, but
yeah, I mean, it's getting better, but I would say that you're kind of right on the money there. It seems that a lot of the research is predominantly done on men, and it's like, well, women are kind of smaller archetypes of men. They just have like these pesky hormones, so we'll just like kind of titrate that. That's sort of generally what we see, and it may be ketone research. Even though I know that ketone bodies and the keto diet, let's say, has been around for many years, and 1,3-butane-diol has been around since, I don't know, maybe the 50s or something. I know that these compounds have been around for a long time, but still relatively, I would say, in its infancy. So we, to find some of to tease apart some of the nuances in sex differences, maybe a little bit early, but just wondering if there was any observations that you may have had. But it sounds like, when we're thinking about ketone supplementation, we want to be thinking about what are we using it for, right? Because even if you're getting to, let's say, 2 millimolar that's still energy, right? Like you were saying, it has to. So what are we using it for? Are you going to be working out? Are you going to be moving? Or is it just like having a donut and sitting down? Like your body's going to have to assimilate and do something with that energy as well. Let's talk a little bit about stacking. I'm not a huge like nootropic person, but just someone who I'm just fascinated with the brain. My very sophisticated stack is ketones and coffee.
Yeah.
So, and I've personally found just like a shot of espresso on a fasted, fasted with some ketone IQ really is like a great workout. I always kind of make the joke that I feel like, there's this scene in Wonder Woman, the first Wonder Woman, where she's fighting the villain, and then she kind of picks up this like big truck and like hurls it at him. And that's sort of how I feel when I have like a stack of like caffeine and some ketone bodies. My first question is, are there synergistic effects of combining something like caffeine with ketone bodies? And the second kind of question that we can get to after that is, if that's a yes, what are some of your other favorite stacks, if any, with ketone bodies or just nootropics in general?
Yeah, it's a great question, because we're talking about the brain so much, and okay, what about all these nootropics or other psychoactives that people are into? The way to think about it is that caffeine increases brain activity, right? It increases your alertness. It decreases your response time. Like it makes you snappy. Like caffeine generally works. However, caffeine doesn't have any calories in it. It is acaloric. And so what it is it's basically like the nitro boost, but without the actual gas. Or it's like yanking at the lawnmower chain to get it going, but like you still need actual gas. So different nootropics, caffeine, probably the most universal one, but if people are into different plant-based microdoses, or even, your reishi mushrooms. I know there's a lot of like with Mudwater, Four Sigmatic, those types of brands cropping up. A lot of, just call it blanket nootropics or psychoactives. What they are doing is they're increasing brain activity and they're increasing brain energy demand, which then begs the question, okay, where is the energy coming from? Like where's the actual gas? Like where are the actual calories that are getting turned into ATP coming from? So you accelerate brain activity, you increase brain energy demand. It stacks super well with ketones, because when you have ketones to then provide that energy for your neurons, it's completely synergistic. Like you've turned on the lawnmower and now you're giving it really good gas, as opposed to you go to Starbucks and you get the Frappuccino sugar bomb, you get a bunch of caffeine, but you also get 55 grams of sugar. And then, the caffeine's got your engine going, and then you're shoveling sugar in there. So you feel maybe like really, maybe like too high, like caffeine and sugar high and all this all at once. And then you crash an hour or two later, not doing your metabolism, your metabolic health any favors either. So it's like, okay, if you're going to take something that's nootropic or psychoactive, I would say like be mindful about the fuel that you are using as the counterpart to that psychoactive that is getting your brain going.
And I think, just referencing Stephen Kinane again, I think that one of his studies, and I'll link it in the show notes for those of you that want to read it. When you supplement, let's say, caffeine with MCT oil, you convert more of those medium chain triglycerides into ketones than you would otherwise if you were just taking MCT on its own.
Super interesting, right? Because caffeine is just accelerating metabolism kind of everywhere in your body. Yeah. And I would say MCTs, it's not this either or thing with ketone IQ, where the reason people like MCTs is they convert into ketones, because, medium chain triglycerides specifically converts well into ketones, especially the C8, the caprylic acid form of MCT converts well into ketones. I don't consider that like to be like an either or thing with also just drinking ketones. Is like you can have both, because you could have, like what a lot of people in our community do is they'll have their coffee with MCTs and then they'll also have ketone IQ, because basically ketone IQ kicks in right away. Like it immediately raises your ketones, and then the MCT over hours gets converted into ketones. So it's like a nice blend. Actually, it's not this like either or thing. So like cool stack there.
And how do you use Ketone IQ? How do you use ketone esters in your everyday life?
Yeah, I have Ketone IQ first thing in the morning. Like I have it with my coffee. I usually have some uh, multivitamins just to kind of round everything out. I have some omega 3s, and I'll have Ketone IQ as part of that. And then I will go for a run, and then I will start. I'll usually have protein. I'll have some sort of healthy fibrous carbs after that. Not afraid of fats. I'll have fats. I love eggs. I think they're like the perfect food.
Nature's superfood. Yep. Love them.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll always anchor my day with it. It's really nice. It feels like even on days where I'm like not running in the morning, I feel like it just lets me like cruise through. Like I just feel really good. I don't need to. I don't get hungry. I feel really dialed in, and then I'll have it kind of as a pick me up in the afternoon. I'll have like a drink or two, like before an important call, or just want like a little energy boost. Like I know better than now. I think a lot of people can maybe resonate with this. Like if I have caffeine in the afternoon, my sleep score tanks. This is what we're saying at the top of it, where we're just in this. It's really cool. It's the modern age that we're in. Like you can see these things. It's not just this like perception of, oh, I didn't sleep well. It's like I can tell if I have caffeine after 12 p.m. that I have an objectively worse sleep score. Like, so I don't touch caffeine after noon anymore. So I like Ketone IQ. Sometimes I'll mix it with like soda, like soda water and lime. I'll just have like a nice little kind of office cocktail while I'm like doing stuff in the afternoon. That feels really nice. But the main thing, I always have it first thing in the morning, and then it's kind of like choose your own adventure. I'll have it like once or twice else throughout the day too.
I love that. And I agree with you. I think that, with our dependence, let's say on coffee, like sometimes you can, I have even just like out for dinner. I was out for dinner the other day and people were ordering coffee after their meals, and like, it was 7 p.m. and I was like, oh my God, you're not going to, of course I never say anything, but in my head, I'm like, oh my God, and the adenosine, and like, how are they going to sleep? And like, if there's like a 6-hour half-life, like I can't have any coffee after, like I have a cup, like a shot of espresso, let's say in the morning, or a cappuccino. And then that's kind of it. That's kind of it for me.
Yeah.
As well.
The 6-hour half-life, I feel like is something that more people should know about. Like I see people gulping down a coffee at like 3 p.m. It's like, would you be gulping down half that much at 9 p.m.?
Because that's what you're doing.
Not,
yeah,
that's what you're doing.
yeah, totally. I love that. Well, tell us a little bit about, so we've been talking all about Ketone IQ. Tell us about where, if people are interested in trying it, where they might find it. And then if they want to learn more about you and the company, just like plug HVMN, plug Ketone IQ, and plug Ketone IQ for me, because I think it's a great product and more people should know about it.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks so much. And the way to follow up is we're at hvmn.com. So it's health via modern nutrition. So hvmn.com. We're at hvmn on Twitter and Instagram and everywhere. Myself, I'm at bdm_runner. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, everywhere. I love hearing from people when they're doing anything, training for something, building a company, trying out a new protocol. Love to hear what people are doing. So feel free to tag me. I love to hear what people are up to, or even if you just see an interesting post or curious my take on that topic. I love to chat with people in the community anytime. So say hello.
Thank you. This has been wonderful. And I'll tell you my like pro tip, and I picked this up from Chris, so I'll give him credit where credit is due. Is like, you should take a little bit right before you do a podcast. And I was like, oh, that's so cool. So I, sometimes I'll do like a little shot of HVMN right before, or Ketone IQ, I should say, right before a podcast. And it's like, oh my gosh, all these words, I have access to all these words. Like I feel like limitless, I feel like Bradley Cooper in that movie, where I can just, all this vernacular, the words just come easily to me, and the prose and everything. It's beautiful. So I will say that I've noticed that as well with my usage.
Super cool. Yeah. Appreciate the feedback. And yeah, you're not alone. Like I just was drinking some. I think that's a lot of how people are cracking it is for the access to the good parts of the brain during the day.
Thank you so much. In this next video, Dr. Sarah Gottfried and I are talking about keto for women and why it is exquisitely different for us. We are talking in this next video about the testosterone advantage, cortisol, and the way that you can do keto right as a woman. Click over here and I'll see you there.
It's not a blanket statement that keto is good for everyone. I want to be sure that that comes through loud and clear because we have to personalize.